I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV Velocities of Music. Today we are going to review the next album, I think it's the fourth album, entitled Empros from the band Russian Circles. Russian Circles are a post-metal band, post everything nowadays. Post-metal, so it's kind of like post-rock, but it's a little bit heavier, right?
Yeah.
The thing that, this is the band's first album on Sargent House, which is a record label in California that we really like.
Red Sparrows, I would compare that.
Exactly, that was where I was going with it. That's the closest comparison in my mind. Now, Russian Circles, I had never heard of before listening to this album, so this was kind of exciting to me to get to listen to Empros. And then in doing some research, hearing that this band toured with Tool and Coheed and Cambria
makes a lot of sense.
Makes perfect sense, because that's actually the way that these guys set up a lot of their songs is similar to how Tool sets up a lot of their songs. It's just
without
they do
vocals.
It without vocals.
Yeah.
And so one thing, I found this album actually kind of tough to dissect. It's really easy to just put on and experience. Wouldn't you say? I mean, did you have the same thing?
Yeah,
and
it flows very well.
Right.
I mean, it's almost like you don't want to dissect it too much just because you'd feel like you'd be interrupting the natural energy of the album.
And this
works so well.
This thing is 44 minutes long, and it's only 6 tracks. So you know you got some really long, expansive tracks, which is kind of part and parcel for well, Tool did that, and anything post-rock or post-metal tends to do that. Now, in trying to describe this, what I had to do is I had to break these songs down and figure out how that they were composing these songs, and then in order to understand how they were putting the album together, because my first thought was, this is so easy to listen to. They're clearly doing something to make that happen, and what it is that this thing is structured to be an album. The whole thing from start to finish is meant to be one fluid listen. They just divided the tracks up somewhere. Now that's easy to do with how they're structuring the sound. So I'm going to kind of describe my interpretation of that and then toss it over to Tom, and he'll give you his feedback. So what I noticed that they were doing and how they compose these songs is that they'll get some sort of guitar riff or melody going, and the whole band will be in this like riff, and then they'll just keep repeating this riff over and over again. They'll make it more and more intense, and then all of a sudden, as it builds, they'll change it up, and then they'll rush in a new section of the song, and then they'll revert back. And by doing that, they create this burgeoning intensity that just is enveloping all. It just brings the listener into the sound, and I like that approach. However, in the band that we just reviewed in the episode prior to this, Youth Lagoon, we talked about how when every song starts and then builds and then comes back down, it gets kind of predictable, and you kind of lose some of the just inherent qualities of the sound. I feel like these guys kind of do that at times, because every song starts soft, grows, and has this big climax, and then comes back down, and then almost to an ambience in between the tracks. Tom, what was your interpretation?
Well, I definitely agree with that. I would say that, the big difference here is that they have enough time where you don't notice it quite as much. It's
longer track lengths.
Yeah, it's not quite as forced.
And the highs are higher.
Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah, the dynamic contrast there, just the range is a little expanded.
Sure.
But still, I definitely see where you're coming from with all that. I agree a lot. I think this is a great album. I think that the big thing for me is that while the really good spots were incredibly good, there definitely were some spots in there where I lost a little bit of interest. They kind of maybe drug things out a little too long, took a little too long to build, but still, when they do hit you with a switch, with like a chord change or something, in one of those heavier spots, man, does it get me. It hits you right in the face, and it wakes you up and makes you just go, oh, that was great. But what I like about this, too, is how not only are they able to flow between the dynamic contrast in the album, from the highs to lows in the energy and tempo and just volume, intensity overall. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. But they're able to do so with the mood as well, and they really correspond with each other well. I mean, in the low spots, in the quiet spots, sometimes you'll get kind of a creepy vibe. Sometimes you'll get kind of a happy vibe.
Right,
like at the beginning of track 2.
Right.
All of a sudden, it sounds a little more optimistic, a little brighter.
And then they just switch it on you, and it's just this tempestuous storm.
It's awesome.
I like that track. That actually sold it for me as a track pick. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, though.
Good point. Some of these are pretty.
And I think the way you mentioned that sometimes the highs and lows doesn't really get you all the time because of that. And I feel like part of the problem with this album, or at least part of the barrier for entry for me, is that any post rock or post metal music where you're not relying on vocals, you have less. The artist has less of an opportunity. They have less layers to grab the listener and and allow the listener to attach to the music. And that's what music is all about. Is finding from either, if you're the artist, if you're an artist, you're trying to get the listener to attach to your music, and if you're a listener, you're trying to find ways to attach to the music you listen to. That's how inherently we all find the music that we like. In this, I feel like I can sit here and analyze what they're doing instrumentally and how they're composing these songs, and I can appreciate that, but unless I get an emotional appeal from it, how can I possibly really love this album long term? And I don't feel like these guys ever really establish a solid warrant for feeling these intense builds and this whole scope of this album that is meant to be a start to end finish, and one listen the entire way through. I feel like by just popping into the first track, 309, you know, they don't really establish any reason to listen to the album and to experience the album. They don't give you a reason to love it. And it's just up to you to naturally like or dislike the sound. And while some people are going to like that more than others, I feel like they could have done more to bring you in and make you attached to it. Yeah. And that's something that Red Sparrow's Sergeant House counterpart actually did much better than I think this band. I really felt that their previous album that we reviewed, you know, they really captured the audience. They really made you care, and it was like, even though there was no vocals in that album, it was like there was a story there, and that allows me to have an emotional appeal with the music.
And that's the thing. Well, since there's no vocals here, there's no vocal hooks. Right. What's going to end up reeling you in is the instrumentality and just the mood. How the moods flow throughout the album because of that instrumentality. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just think it's going to make it a little more difficult for some listeners. But also what is cool is that the guitars, the way the guitars work, I mean, you'll switch from these really moving lead parts to just crunchy, simple, awesome, just powerhouses of chords. Really thick. You get like some distorted bass in there, kind of reminiscent of like the post-hardcore scene, or even like Kylesa, which we reviewed like a year and a half ago. And the way it's produced, I mean, it's not sharp and crisp like the new Mastodon album is. Everything, I don't want to say muddled, but everything interlocks a little more rather than just kind of sitting on top of each other. It just creates this huge booming sound.
And the bass is turned way up.
Yeah.
In fact, what I found interesting about that is that the producer, was the same guy who produced a lot of the Interpol albums and Secret Machines. And Interpol, the bass has just kind of dropped off over the years, so it was interesting to hear that this producer all of a sudden put bass at such a priority in the mix, so I like that. And the bass was probably my favorite part about this album. I'm not surprised that you liked it as well as you did, considering you're a bassist, but that was one of my favorite parts. Overall, Tom, I'm sitting around a 75 for this one. I wish I could have attached to it a little bit more, and then this album would have been incredible, but just that lack of connection with it, I think, brought me down.
I'm going 81. This is my cup of tea, so I really did dig it.
Cool. What did you guys think about Empros? Let us know at www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.